All right. Hello, everyone. It's Mike shooting here with Levi Minderhout, my colleague Levi. So this is the third podcast, BC election podcast we're doing. We're 2 weeks into this election campaign. We have 2 more weeks to go. And this time in this podcast, we're gonna recap some of the things that have been going on this past week, any new developments. But we're also going to start digging into the platforms of each party. They haven't all released it yet. This week we hope to be able to get through the BC NDP and the BC Greens.
Yeah, they're the only two parties that have released their full platforms yet. I guess the last one is the BC Conservatives, but
Yeah, and then I think we'll also, when we touch on the BC Conservatives next week, hopefully we'll also, if there's anything of relevance that the BC CHP has to offer, if they've released anything at that time, then we'll also make our viewers aware of that. Anyway, just a brief recap. The very first podcast we did, it was more an introduction. What's the lay of the land? What was the current scenario that had evolved after the last election in 2020? And how are we going into this election? Lots of new developments we talked about there. The second one included some campaign updates, as well as some of the key candidates who are running. And then obviously, and we'll do that again this time, and we'll do that even right now, encourage you to get involved in this election campaign. There's tons of ways that you can get involved, whether it's financially supporting, we talked about that, whether it's helping door knock with candidates, leafleting, and so on. And certainly be sure to count on voting on October 19th. If you can't vote on October 19th, be sure to check out BC Elections website where the advanced polling stations are. I know I have to do that myself because I'm going to be in Alberta on election day, so I'll definitely be doing my voting in the advanced polling.
Yeah, I probably will too, because we're expecting child number 2 5 days before election day, so you never know when babies are going to come. So it's good to get it out of the way sooner rather than later, so that I'm not scrambling last minute.
It's going to be a more memorable election for you guys.
Yeah, it will be.
For the Minderhout family.
Yeah.
Okay. As far as campaign updates, Levi, going into week 3 next week of the election campaign, obviously there's the two main parties, right? The NDP and the BC Conservatives.
Yep.
They're going to be running candidates, I think, in every single riding in the province. Are all of the other parties doing that as well?
No, those are the only two parties that are going to be running all 93 candidates in all 93 ridings. The Green Party, last time around, and maybe the time before that as well, they ran candidates in every riding, but they simply ran out of time to get candidates nominated. So actually, in the last week, last episode I mentioned that last Saturday, which would be September 28th, I think it was the deadline for candidates to file with Elections BC that they were going to run in the election. Yeah. And in order to run with an election, you have to state your intention, and you have to get candidate signatures from at least 100 people in the riding. So I was actually getting emails from the BC Greens saying, "Hey, can you quickly sign off and send this nomination form so a Green Party candidate can run in your riding?"
Okay.
Because they were just bulk emailing people. I'm not a particular Green Party supporter. I get their emails from time to time, but they were asking random people to get their members to sign up.
That's surprising that they weren't ready. I mean, this election didn't come as a surprise to us.
No, it didn't. But it's not like I live in Abbotsford Mission, for example, and that's not usually a hotbed of Green support. Okay. And so lots of ridings. They only get candidates in 69 ridings, so that means in 24 of them, so about a quarter of them, they're not going to be running any candidates whatsoever. Okay. And that might help the BC NDP a little bit more, because some of those voters who might have voted Green, my guess is they're probably going to be more supportive of the BC NDP than the BC Conservatives or other parties. So
that'll be something to watch come election day to see what happens in those ridings.
And it's really interesting because in some ridings, oftentimes you'll go to the ballot box and there's multiple people running for office. But in some ridings, like my riding, there's only going to be an NDP and a Conservative. Those are the only two candidates that are going to be running in that riding. Yeah. I think it's going to be the same in your riding, actually, here in Chilliwack, Cultus Lake. I think it's just a Conservative and NDP.
Okay. I haven't seen the list. I do know that in previous years, we've lived in this area for 10 years. So we've been through a few election cycles here in BC, and there is often 3 to 5 candidates. CHP as well, we talked about this last time. They're running only 2 candidates in the kind of the most northern ridings of the province.
Yep.
Like Rod Taylor's riding, it sounds huge. When Levi described it to me, and I think it goes all the way up to the Yukon border.
Yeah.
From Smithers, that's massive.
Yeah, it's basically like the northern 6th of the riding, or of the province.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's one more that's running. His name is, let me find it, Erwin Jeffrey in Skeena, which is just a little bit west of Rod Taylor's riding.
Okay,
So those are the two ridings.
towards the coast.
Yeah, towards the coast, but it doesn't quite include Prince Rupert yet, but like
Okay.
Terrace Kitimat area.
Yeah. Okay, and then the other factor, and we touched on this last time, is that there is a lot of independent candidates running in this election. A lot of them are because they were former BC United
Yeah.
candidates, and that party obviously is not running candidates. So some of them are running as independents, and that we're going to be keeping our eye on that because that has the possibility to change things. In fact, just as a bit of a tangent here, Levi had an in-office poll that we could kind of throw our numbers out there as to what we would guess the outcome of the election would be. I think I was the only one who thinks that any independents will win.
Yeah,
I put two there. I think there will be at least two. There's 54 running throughout the province, so
which is basically a record by the number of independents running.
there haven't been that many before.
I couldn't find any good data on it, but just because of like one political party, the BC United, not running candidates, and a new one in the BC Conservatives running, like there's like a lot of change and there's lots of opportunities or desires for people to run as independents.
Yeah.
And it probably is more likely that they would get elected this time rather than any other election because of all that change. But I'm still skeptical. Like politics today is so much about party brands, about party leaders, about just overall messaging that a lot of people don't really pay too much attention to like the actual name behind a party on the ballot. So there's a lot of really high profile independents that are going to be running, but I'm still skeptical that any are actually going to be elected. But if they are elected, that's, again, I think we mentioned last time, that's only happened like once in the last 50 years here in British Columbia. It would be really rare, and they could hold a lot of power and a lot of influence if they did get elected.
Yeah. I think that's the part that I'm secretly kind of hoping for. I think that'd be a neat scenario if there was a minority government and the independents were able to, just have a real impact that way.
It would.
Okay, as far as the polling, hasn't changed a whole lot, although it seems like more of the polls lately are showing the Conservatives on top, although, as you like to say, it's still a statistical tie.
Yeah.
The difference is very marginal.
Yeah. But they have been tilting towards the Conservatives. Like I was just looking at the one site, and basically 8 of the last 12 polls have had the Conservatives 1, 2, or 3 points ahead of the NDP. 3 have been ties, and only one of those 12 polls have the NDP been leading. So a slight edge to the Conservatives, but it's still very much a neck and neck race.
Yeah. And this time I noticed Levi always prepares some notes before the podcast. You included 338 Canada. So that's a online organization that does a lot of tracking as far as the ridings go.
I think they call themselves like poll aggregators, and they do like projections of how those polls might translate and how many seats each party could win.
Yeah, so I think there's I thought that was interesting you included that because that here you're saying indicated that the BC Conservatives would have a higher seat count than the NDP as well. Because it's not always that the popular vote translates into the majority of the seats. That doesn't always happen. Depends how things break down throughout the province, right? Like you said, if in those ridings where Greens aren't running, those people ought to just kind of vote NDP at the end, or in the ridings where there's BC United, former BC United candidate running as an independent, and they vote, they don't vote Conservative, they go with the independent, that could impact things.
Yep, or in like lots of rural ridings throughout BC, northern BC especially, like the Conservatives might get like 70% of the vote and like run away with it. And then in downtown Vancouver, the NDP might get 60 or 70% of the vote and run away with it there. And so that can kind of skew like the overall number of votes a party receives. So you can be winning and get more of the popular vote than the other party, but if it's not distributed around the province in the right ways, you might not necessarily win. So that's always one thing to look at. You need to be strong in like all over the province and not just in specific areas if you want to win a government.
Yeah. All to say, things still look 2 weeks in very, very tight, which means our votes matter. We got to get out to the polling stations, whether through the advanced polls or on October 19th. Okay, we're trying to stick on time today a little better than we have in the past two. We're getting better at it, I think.
We're getting better.
Still new at this. But before we get into the platforms, another significant event happened this past week where there was a leaders debate. Now, as we said last time, there's going to be a televised leaders debate next week, Tuesday, on October 8th. But this past week on September 30th, there was a radio debate on CKNW. So it had leaders of the Green, NDP, and BC Conservatives. I didn't listen to it. Levi, you had a chance to listen to it. I think you said a couple days later. anything of note that we could share from that debate?
There wasn't a lot of things that would be like new. So we're going to get into the BC NDP and BC Green Party platforms because they released them just this week. And the BC Conservatives have been releasing some policy ideas and policy planks throughout the campaign. So there wasn't like a lot new in terms of like policy ideas, but just the overall tone of the debate. I mean, it was disappointing.
Really?
Like
Okay.
more and more, we're used to this actually, so it's not necessarily new or surprising. But oftentimes, political debates aren't necessarily about let's have like two people having a civil conversation with them and like really arguing about which policy or which worldview or which ideology or vision of the province is better than another. It'd be great if we could have those substantial discussions, but a lot of times, and this debate, this radio debate was no exception, it was more the leaders like just arguing about what are the basic facts underlying things. They couldn't even agree on most of the facts. There's often there was quite a bit of name calling, people calling each other liars, people not answering questions.
Oh, really?
So I sure hope, I hope and pray that we can have a higher level of civil discourse in our province, because I think fundamentally that's going to be better for your democracy and just be better governances too.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be a show to call the other person a liar on television, or you might score some political points out of there in the immediate term, but at long term, I don't think it's going to be good for the way our politics is run. And it's particularly if there's a minority government when parties are going to have to work together.
Yeah.
A lot of this could bite people in the butt when
Yeah.
Parliament returns.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think I would agree as far as the civil discourse. There, we talk about that regularly, even when it comes to the Parliament in Ottawa. How sometimes it's quite pathetic how they can engage with each other. But I think what it also tells us is that means it's important that you get to know your candidate.
Yeah.
Like, who's the person vying for your vote?
Yeah.
Don't rely on necessarily on the debate or on the stuff that the media puts out there, the quick sound bites, etc. Get to know them by calling their offices. If they send volunteers to your door, engage them in conversation.
Yeah.
So that you know who you're going to be supporting when you go to the polling booth.
Yeah, because character matters. Like I was just talking to we were out in Manitoba, and we had one MLA come talk to the students about his experience being in politics, and one of his main messages was that, like, as a Christian, like one of the best ways to be a Christian in politics doesn't necessarily have to do with how you vote or what issues you prioritize, but do you have a godly character in the legislature, in politics, or anything like that? Because that is more and more lacking in our politics and in our country, as fewer people identify as Christian or practice their Christianity. And so having that respectful, civil attitude, that our Christ-like attitude fundamentally is seriously lacking in our politics, and I would love for more Christians to get involved and demonstrate that in this public square, but even for people who aren't Christians, for them to show some of that as well.
Yeah. It reminds me of the reaction to, this is, again, it's a bit of a tangent, but when Chuck Strahl passed away earlier this year in the summer, so much of the response to that was his speaking into his character as to how he did his work. It was really neat to hear how a Christian man was able to use that position. Anyway, we're going to keep moving along. Platforms. So the BC NDP released big parts of their platform this past week. There's a lot of things here. We're not going to have time to touch on them all. What are some of the highlights, Levi, that you can share with our viewers that especially relate to the issues that ARPA Canada deals with regularly?
Yeah, so like in really broad strokes, like when I was reading through and perusing through the BC NDP platform, it was just kind of like, so largely a continuation of what's been happening in the province in the last few years. Like not a huge number of big, bold, flashy, big changes of what's been going on. More or less just like minor tweaks around the edges. So some of those tweaks that might be of note, a little bit, they're proposing a big tax cut by raising the amount of money you could earn before you start paying income taxes. So you might have heard EB talk about or seen a headline that every family is going to get like $1,000 tax cut. That's one big policy. They're continuing to expand $10 a day childcare. They're going to create a new industrial land reserve. It seems kind of like the agricultural land reserve, but for like commercial land, which seems interesting.
So that's new? That's something?
Yeah, that's something I haven't seen before.
Yep.
They want to protect 30% of BC's land and water in provincial parks so that it can't be logged or touched or be open to natural resource development. They are pitching a new rail service through the Fraser Valley, which would be intriguing. I know that's some
very
local.
intriguing.
I know another local news organization, the Fraser Valley Current down here, has said that's basically logistically impossible based on their journalism and the research. So it's one thing to promise something, another thing to actually bring it into effect.
I can remember as a child growing up in Surrey, and there were, you know how sometimes they put billboards on trucks?
Yeah.
Trailers? There was a trailer with a billboard talking about rail to the valley.
Okay.
So this is, well, giving away a bit of my age here, but like 35 years ago. So this has been talked about for a long time.
Yeah, and maybe it's been talked about because in concept it sounds like a good idea, but it might be hard to actually do. Anyways, going through, they also said that they fully committed that they're going to be running deficits for the coming years. Like in this election platform, they committed to another $1.6 billion of more spending in this coming fiscal year, and then another $1.2 billion in the next fiscal year on top of the deficit they're already running. So they're not really going to be tightening the purse strings at all.
Yeah.
But on a couple issues that we really care about, so many of you, hopefully this week, will have been to our ARPA Fall Tour when we were talking about freedom of expression. And we talked about federal hate speech law, but the BC NDP, they have a very brief reference in their platform, and they're promising to bring in a new provincial hate speech law. So that's concerning. There's no details about what that might include and what they're trying to target there. But for the most part, hate speech laws have not have disproportionately impacted Christians and their attempts to spread the gospel and a Christian view of society. Yeah. So that does not seem like a positive thing from the BC NDP by any means.
No. Okay, so is this a tweak to, because I thought BC had hate crime legislation.
Yeah, we do have a provincial BC human rights code, which has some hate speech provisions in there. And so I was even just talking to John before this. He doesn't really know exactly how this might play out or what this might look like.
John is John Sycamore.
Yeah, our director of law and policy. You see another John? John Horgan? I was just talking about John Horgan.
Just making sure all our viewers know who you're talking to.
Yeah, no, good.
Okay, so that's not a good thing.
That's not a good thing. And then one other thing that's not good is that, well, we already knew this, but they committed to defending and expanding access to abortion. They made a specific promise about how they would expand access to for abortion by saying that they would empower or give the ability of midwives to prescribe mifetamine, the abortion pill. So that's one of their practical ways that they want to expand access to abortion for different people. So that was unfortunate to see in there.
Yeah, that one always hits me a lot. As you know, like I did a lot of work on ARPA's We Need a Law campaign, and along with working alongside like pro-life politicians at provincial and federal level. And it's always striking to me how pro-abortion legislators are always pushing. Like you'd think in Canada you couldn't expand access to abortion more. Like we're the most extreme country in the entire world when it comes to zero abortion legal framework. But they're always pushing. Anyway, it's sad when you think of the number of lives that are lost to abortion every year.
Yeah.
And here we have a provincial party that's in government right now and wants to receive another mandate, and they're committing and promising to expand that injustice even further.
One thing that I saw from the party that I was looking for in there was any reference to like LGBTQ issues, because traditionally the NDP has been all about like SOGI 123 in schools or celebrating LGBTQ things, but I've only found a single reference in the policy platform officially to those types of issues, and that was under a gender-based violence plan. So it wasn't really talking about something specifically for the gay or lesbian or transgender community. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily hoping this a lot that they're going to not push this if they were re-elected, but it was interesting that it wasn't something that was front and center in their platform.
Okay, let's move quickly into the BC NDP. So they're running, the BC Greens. They're running 69 candidates, we already said. What are some of the highlights of the platforms and policies that they released this past week?
So kind of where they really started is they really emphasize that they want the government to focus on increasing people's well-being. And they actually quote at the very beginning of their platform from the small country of Bhutan in Asia, their legal code. And they quote this little bit. So they said, if the government cannot create happiness for its people, then there is no purpose for the government to exist.
Oh, wow.
So right off the bat, it just like shows you like the different like philosophies that parties have about what government means or what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Like if you would ask the average Reformed Christian, we'd probably say like the purpose of government is to enforce public justice. Like, that's the first thing they need to do.
Yeah, restrain lawless activity.
Yeah.
Like Romans 13, right?
Yeah, exactly. But for other parties, like the BC Green Party, it seems to be different. Their focus is like the government needs to promote human happiness and well-being. So that was just an interesting introduction there. But big planks for their platform would be have more deference to Indigenous leaders when it comes to like natural resource progress or government decision making. A new model of healthcare delivery, they're calling it the Dogwood model. So they want to reorganize our healthcare system. They talk a few times in there about housing as being a fundamental human right, which is a intriguing way to talk about housing. And so if it's a human right, they are committed to the government being involved in making sure that people have housing. So they have some policies on that there. They want to do free public transit across the province, get rid of all oil and gas production in British Columbia. And they want to create a new income tax bracket for people earning above $350,000 in BC. So kind of the richest, maybe 1% of British Columbians, they want them to pay more in taxes.
Okay. Any semblance of like a cost analysis for some of these things, or a proposed financial plan as far as how this is going to work?
Yeah, they did actually have a costing in there, and that costing basically says between having increasing corporate tax rates, that new income tax, and continuing to increase the carbon tax. We mentioned they want to do that last week. Okay. Those would basically pay for all their new proposals and spending. Okay. So their promise, their election platform basically wouldn't call for really much change in spending or no new deficit or surplus as it is now. It should be more government revenue and more government spending.
Okay. Any other key highlights from them that you want to touch on?
Yeah, so there are a couple that relate to some of the issues that ARPA deals with. Over the last number of years, they've been pretty quiet when it comes to SOGI, but they had a clear quote in their platform that they want to continue to expand SOGI 123 in schools. So that was disappointing for them to come out with. They also really wanted to emphasize that they are against conversion therapy. In our election, I don't have a copy of it right now, but in the election guide that we put together, we noted that in 2019 and 2021, they introduced legislation to try to ban conversion therapy here in British Columbia, and they committed to doing that again if they have the opportunity. So they don't think the federal conversion therapy ban, as bad as it is, they don't think that's enough. They want a provincial ban as well. And then they also committed to expanding access to abortion here in British Columbia. They weren't as specific as the BC NDP, but that was something that they included in there.
Any indication from them how, like, I'm curious on this conversion therapy ban because, yeah, you're right. They've brought it up a number of times, but 2021 they did. And then in 2021, the federal government passed C4.
Yeah.
I know that these conversion therapy bans started at the municipal level, right? When it came to granting business licenses to certain groups and individuals.
Well, that's how it started in BC.
I think in Alberta they were doing
it the same, but I think the first conversion therapy ban, I think it happened in Ontario, and that was something like 2015 or 2017. I think that's where it originally started in Canada, but yeah, they have been active at the municipal levels.
I'm just wondering at a provincial level how, like, what would differentiate it? Like, they obviously can't impact the criminal code because they're provincial government. So
yeah, I have no idea exactly how that might happen. My best guess is that they're probably, again, just virtue signaling here and saying that we don't like this. We don't want it to happen in British Columbia, so let's pass a law even if it's already illegal at a different level of government. Okay. But maybe there are real things that the provincial government could do here. I don't know.
All right. Okay, so that's two parties, the BC NDP, the BC Greens. We encourage you to don't just take our word for these things. If those parties, you want to learn more about them, visit their websites, check out these plans, talk to the candidates who are going to be asking you for your vote. Next week, we hope to cover off the BC Conservatives and the Christian Heritage Party. As we wrap this up, we do want to encourage everyone, again, to see this election time, this 4-week time period here in BC as an opportune time to bring and highlight some of the issues that you care deeply about to those people who quite well might be the government of British Columbia as we move forward past October 19th. So please become involved either through just getting educated on where the parties stand, But also then, like we've said numerous times, right? These campaigns need finances to continue driving them forward. If there's a candidate that you really want to get behind, plunk a sign in your lawn, go out and do some door knocking for that candidate, especially if that candidate aligns with the values that you might have. And look beyond just the party labels. Like get to know the individuals who are running for those parties and see who best to support come October 19th. And then again, October 19th is voting day.
Yep.
But if you can't make it that day, or if you think that you might have other plans, or maybe you're helping with get out the vote for a certain candidate.
Yep. Or maybe you're expecting a child.
Exactly. Or out of the province like myself. Then look at the advanced polls. They're starting next week, Thursday already.
Yeah, they'll be going for a full week except for Monday or Thursday to Wednesday, except for Thanksgiving Monday.
Okay. So ample opportunity. No excuses really not to vote in this coming election.
Yep. Yep. Turnout's been going actually down quite a bit in British Columbia politics for the last 20 years or so. Let's do our part, as at least the reform community, to make sure that that voting rate starts to increase a little bit again. So
absolutely. All right, podcast number 3. We're about to close off. We'll see you all next week with episode number 4.
Yep. Take care and God bless.